Montana Territory, 1875. The land was as vast as the sky above it, painted with stretches of golden prairie grass that swayed like ocean waves when the wind blew. For Mitchell Adams, this untamed wilderness represented both freedom and solitude, two things he had come to cherish above all else during his 25 years of life. Mitchell dismounted his chestnut stallion at the edge of his modest ranch, removing his well-worn Stetson to wipe the sweat from his brow. 6 years he had spent building this place, and not once had he considered sharing it with anyone. His lean, muscular frame bore the evidence of hard work. Calloused hands, sun-bronzed skin, and piercing blue eyes that rarely softened for anything or anyone. A light stubble shadowed his strong jawline, giving him a rugged appearance that matched the land he called home. "Come on, Scout," he called to his horse, leading the animal toward the stable. "Just you and me again tonight." The words echoed in the emptiness of the yard, a reminder of the solitude he had chosen. Mitchell believed firmly that a man could only truly count on himself out here in the West. He had witnessed too many good men die trying to protect others, his own father included. At 18, Mitchell had watched helplessly as his pa took a bullet defending their first homestead from raiders. His mother had died of heartbreak not 6 months later. Since then, Mitchell had lived by one truth. Attachment was weakness, and weakness got you killed on the frontier. Better to live alone than to risk that kind of pain again. His ranch, his horses, and occasionally the company of other ranchers during cattle drives were all he needed. Or so he told himself on the cold, quiet nights when the vastness of his empty house seemed to mock him. What Mitchell wanted was simple: to build his herd, expand his land, and prove that a man could thrive on his own terms in this untamed country. What he refused to acknowledge was the hollow feeling that sometimes crept into his chest when he watched families gather in town after Sunday service, or when he saw the way married couples leaned on each other during hard times. As Mitchell unsaddled Scout and brushed him down, thunder rumbled in the distance. He glanced at the darkening sky, noting the storm clouds gathering on the horizon. Another spring storm approaching. The land needed the rain, but the timing was poor. He had planned to ride out at dawn to check his northern fence line. "Might as well get some food in me before that hits," he muttered to no one. Mitchell was halfway to his cabin when he heard it, the distant sound of wheels and hooves approaching. His hand instinctively moved to the revolver at his hip as he squinted into the fading light. Visitors were rare, and unannounced ones often meant trouble. A wagon appeared on the horizon, moving at an alarming speed, horse straining against the harness. The driver, a woman, Mitchell realized with surprise, was hunched forward, desperately urging the exhausted animal onward. Behind her, 3 riders followed, gaining ground with each passing second. Mitchell's first instinct was to turn away. Not his problem, not his fight, but something, perhaps the desperate way the woman kept looking over her shoulder, or maybe some long-dormant sense of decency, made him swing back on his Scout's bare back. "Hiya," he called, digging his heels into the horse's flanks, racing toward the unfolding drama. The woman saw him coming and changed course, heading straight for him. As they drew closer, Mitchell caught his first real glimpse of her face. Young, perhaps 21 or 22, with striking features made more intense by fear. Long blonde hair whipped behind her like a golden flag as she drove the wagon recklessly across the uneven ground. "Help me," she called out as their paths converged. "Please." Mitchell pulled alongside her wagon, noting the 3 men gaining ground. Rough-looking sorts with bandanas pulled up over their faces. "Follow me to the ranch," he shouted, then wheeled Scout around to face the pursuers. He drew his revolver and fired 2 warning shots into the air. The men pulled up short, clearly reassessing the situation now that their quarry had found protection. "This ain't your business, Cowboy," one of them called. "You're on Adams' land now," Mitchell responded coldly. "That makes it my business." The men conferred briefly, then the leader spat on the ground. "This ain't over," he threatened before they turned their horses and rode away. Mitchell watched them retreat, then rode back to where the woman had stopped her wagon. She was trembling, her hands white-knuckled on the reins, her breath coming in ragged gasps. Up close, Mitchell could see she was beautiful, her deep blue eyes rimmed with tears, her skin fair with a dusting of freckles across her nose. Her simple blue dress was dusty from the road, but of good quality. "Thank you," she whispered. "I thought they would catch me for certain." Who are they? Mitchell asked gruffly, keeping his distance. And who are you? My name is Nora Summers, she said, her voice steadying. Those men work for Emmett Hargrove. I was supposed to marry him tomorrow. Mitchell's eyebrows rose. Supposed to? I refused, she said, lifting her chin. He's not the man I thought he was. When I tried to leave town, he sent those men after me. Said if I wouldn't be his wife willingly, he'd make sure I had no choice. Mitchell's jaw tightened. He'd heard of Hargrove, a wealthy rancher from the next county with political ambitions and a reputation for getting whatever he wanted. Not the kind of enemy a solitary rancher needed. You picked a poor sanctuary, Miss Summers, Mitchell said. I'm just one man with a small spread. If Hargrove wants you back, he has the men and means to make that happen. Please, she said, and there was steel beneath the desperation in her voice. Just for tonight. The storm is coming, and I have nowhere else to go. By morning, I'll be on my way to my cousin in Helena. The first fat drops of rain began to fall, and thunder boomed closer now. Mitchell looked at the darkening sky, then back at the woman. Everything he believed told him to send her on her way. Other people's troubles only became your own if you let them. But the rain was coming harder now, and even he wasn't heartless enough to send a woman out into a spring storm with dangerous men potentially waiting. Fine. One night, he conceded. We'll put your horse in the stable. You can sleep in the house. I'll take the barn. Relief washed over her face. Thank you, Mr. Adams. Mitchell Adams. Mr. Adams. I won't forget your kindness. As they led her wagon to his stable, Mitchell told himself this was a temporary inconvenience, nothing more. By this time tomorrow, Nora Summers would be gone, and his life would return to its predictable solitude. He had no idea how completely wrong he was. The storm unleashed its fury just as they reached the cabin. Mitchell built up the fire while Nora stood awkwardly near the door, water dripping from her clothes. There's a screen in the corner, Mitchell said, not meeting her eyes. I have a spare shirt and trousers you can change into. They'll be too big, but they're dry. He pointed to a small chest. Some of my mother's things are in there if you prefer. While she changed, Mitchell busied himself at the stove, heating coffee and pulling together a simple meal from his stores. When Nora emerged from behind the screen, she wore one of his mother's old nightgowns with a shawl wrapped around her shoulders. The sight of his mother's clothes brought an unexpected tightness to Mitchell's throat. I hope you don't mind, she said softly. It seemed more proper. Mitchell nodded curtly. Sit. Eat something. They ate in silence, the storm raging outside. Mitchell kept his responses short when she attempted conversation, unwilling to encourage familiarity. But as the meal progressed, Nora's gentle persistence wore down his defenses enough that he found himself answering her questions about his ranch. You manage all this alone? She asked, genuine admiration in her voice. A man can do what needs doing if he puts his mind to it, Mitchell replied. My father believed that too, Nora said, her eyes growing distant. He built our farm from nothing after the war. When he died last winter, I tried to keep it going, but... Her voice faltered. Neighbors helped when they could, but a woman alone. Well, that's when Emmett started calling. Said he'd take care of everything. Mitchell studied her face in the firelight. Why run if he offered security? Nora's expression hardened. Security at what price? The first time he struck me for disagreeing with him, I knew what kind of care he offered. My father taught me that respect must be the foundation of any union. Her words settled in the room between them. Mitchell found himself unexpectedly impressed by her courage. Many women would have accepted Hargrove's proposal despite his character, choosing safety over uncertainty. You should get some sleep, Mitchell said finally, standing up. Take the bed. I'll check on the animals and bed down in the stable. Mr. Adams, Nora called as he reached for his coat. I know I'm imposing, but thank you. Not everyone would help a stranger. Mitchell paused with his hand on the door. Don't thank me yet. Those men might come back, and Hargrove isn't a man who gives up easily. First light, you should be on your way. With that, he stepped out into the storm, preferring the howling wind to the unsettling feelings stirring within him. Nora Summers was not his responsibility. By this time tomorrow, she would be gone, and the disruption to his carefully ordered life would end. He told himself it was better that way. But as Mitchell settled into the hay of his stable, the image of Nora's determined blue eyes and grateful smile followed him into restless dreams. Morning broke clear and bright. the storm having swept away to leave freshly washed skies. Mitchell woke at dawn as was his habit, his body stiff from a night in the stable. He fed the horses, including Nora's weary mare, before making his way back to the cabin. He half expected to find Nora still asleep, but instead discovered her at his stove, deftly preparing breakfast. The cabin smelled of coffee and frying bacon, scents that had been absent since his mother's passing. She had dressed again in her blue traveling dress, though it was still somewhat damp. "Good morning, Mr. Adams," she said brightly. "I hope you don't mind. I wanted to repay your hospitality somehow." Mitchell stood awkwardly in his own doorway, suddenly aware of his rumpled appearance. "You didn't need to do that." "I wanted to," she replied, setting a plate on the table. "Please sit. Everything's ready." Mitchell hesitated, then sat at his own table, feeling strangely like a guest. The food was simple but prepared with care: eggs, bacon, and biscuits that put his own cooking to shame. He ate in silence for a moment before curiosity got the better of him. "Where did you learn to cook like this?" Nora smiled, the expression transforming her face. "My mother taught me before she passed. She always said the way to show love was through good food and an open heart." A shadow crossed her features, though I suspect my skills were part of what attracted Emmett. He often commented on how I'd make a fine hostess for his political ambitions. Mitchell found himself studying her hands, delicate but clearly accustomed to work. Not the hands of a woman who had been raised to be merely decorative. "You said you were headed to Helena? To your cousin?" Nora nodded. "Martha and her husband have a boarding house there. She's offered me a position helping to run it." Mitchell nodded, then stood abruptly. "We should get your wagon ready. Those men could return, and it's best if you're well on your way by then." The disappointment that flashed across Nora's face was quickly masked. "Of course. You've been more than kind already." They worked together to prepare her wagon, checking the wheels and harness. Mitchell filled her water barrel and provided some provisions for the journey. As he helped her onto the wagon seat, their hands touched briefly, and Mitchell found himself noticing the softness of her skin despite the calluses that spoke of her farm work. "Thank you, Mr. Adams," Nora said earnestly. "I won't forget your kindness." Mitchell stepped back, hat in hand. "Safe journey, Miss Summers." He watched as she drove away, telling himself the heaviness in his chest was merely relief at returning to his solitude. He had a ranch to run, fences to mend, cattle to tend. No time for distractions. Mitchell threw himself into his work with unusual intensity, as if physical labor could drive away the memory of blue eyes and a gentle smile. 3 days passed in a blur of chores and exhaustion, deliberately sought to ensure dreamless sleep. On the 4th day, as Mitchell returned from mending fences on his northern boundary, he spotted riders approaching, too many for comfort. He counted 6 men and recognized the lead rider immediately from the descriptions he'd heard in town. Emmett Hargrove had come himself this time. Mitchell rode to meet them at the edge of his property, hand resting casually near his holstered revolver. Hargrove was an imposing man in his 40s, expensively dressed with a silver-trimmed saddle and a calculating look in his cold eyes. "Mitchell Adams?" Hargrove called as they drew near. "This is Adams' land," Mitchell confirmed. "State your business." Hargrove's smile didn't reach his eyes. "I believe you assisted a young woman a few days ago. Miss Nora Summers." "My fiancée." "Ex-fiancée, from what I gathered," Mitchell corrected. "And yes, I gave her shelter during the storm." "A gentleman's gesture," Hargrove said smoothly. "However, I'm concerned about her welfare. She's not thinking clearly. Grief over her father's passing has affected her judgment. I've promised her father's deathbed that I would care for her." Mitchell's eyes narrowed. "Funny. She seemed clear-headed to me. Clear enough to know she didn't want to marry a man who struck her." Hargrove's expression hardened. "Young women often exaggerate. Nora has a flair for the dramatic." "That's so." Mitchell felt his temper rising. "Dramatic enough to flee in terror with your men, chasing her down like an animal?" "A misunderstanding," Hargrove dismissed. "My men were merely trying to ensure her safety on the road." "With guns?" Mitchell challenged. Hargrove's facade of civility slipped. "Where is she, Adams?" "I know she was here." "Gone," Mitchell said simply. "Headed to Helena days ago. If she's truly your fiancée, surely you know where her family lives." Something dangerous flickered in Hargrove's eyes. "This territory can be hazardous for a solitary rancher, Adams. Accidents happen. Cattle stray. Fires start. Is that a threat, Hargrove?" Merely an observation, Hargrove replied, though his tone said otherwise. If you hear from Miss Summers, I'd appreciate you letting me know. For her own good. With that, Hargrove wheeled his horse around, his men following. Mitchell watched them go, a sick feeling in his stomach. He had no doubt Hargrove meant every implied threat. The man wasn't used to being denied, and Mitchell had just made himself a target. More troubling still was the realization that Nora might be in danger if Hargrove found her in Helena. Mitchell tried to tell himself it wasn't his concern, that he'd done his duty by helping her escape. But the thought of Hargrove's men catching up to her churned his stomach. 3 more days passed with Mitchell constantly on alert, sleeping with his rifle nearby. He rode his boundaries more frequently, watching for signs of Hargrove's men. The anticipated trouble came not from Hargrove, however, but from an unexpected quarter. Mitchell was repairing a loose board on his porch when he heard the distant rattle of wagon wheels. Shading his eyes against the afternoon sun, he was stunned to see a familiar figure driving toward his ranch. Nora Summers had returned. His first reaction was anger. Hadn't she understood the danger? But as she drew closer, he saw the exhaustion in her posture, the defeat written on her face. What happened? He demanded as he helped her down from the wagon. Why aren't you in Helena? Nora's eyes were rimmed with red, her face pale with fatigue. Hargrove's men were watching the road. They recognized me outside Fort Benton. I barely escaped them. She swallowed hard. I didn't know where else to go. I'm sorry, Mr. Adams. Mitchell ran a hand through his hair in frustration. Hargrove was here looking for you. He threatened me, and he'll be back when he learns you've returned. I'll leave at first light, Nora said quickly. I just needed somewhere safe for the night. I haven't slept properly in days. Mitchell wanted to insist she leave immediately, that her problems weren't his concern. But the defeat in her voice, so different from the determined woman he'd met during the storm, stirred something protective in him. Come inside, he said gruffly. You look dead on your feet. Inside the cabin, Mitchell poured her a cup of coffee while she sank gratefully into a chair. Hargrove has men watching all the main roads, she explained. My cousin wrote warning me not to come. They'd already visited her, asking questions. What will you do now? Mitchell asked. Nora's hands trembled slightly around her cup. I don't know. My farm is gone. Hargrove foreclosed on the mortgage after I fled. I have some money saved, but not enough to start over somewhere distant. Mitchell paced the small cabin, torn between self-preservation and growing concern for this woman who seemed to have nowhere left to turn. Finally, he made a decision he suspected he would come to regret. You can stay, he said reluctantly, just until we figure out something more permanent. I have a line shack about 2 miles west of here. It's small, but it's shelter. Hope flickered in Nora's eyes. I wouldn't impose without earning my keep. I can cook, clean, garden, whatever you need. Mitchell was about to protest when Nora added softly, I'll cook for you every day. Real meals, not just coffee and beans. The unexpected offer struck Mitchell in a place he hadn't realized was vulnerable. How long had it been since he'd had proper home-cooked meals? Since someone had cared enough to offer such a simple comfort? I can't pay much, he warned. Safety is payment enough, she responded. And so began an arrangement that Mitchell told himself was temporary. He helped Nora settle into the line shack, a one-room cabin he used during calving season. It was basic but sound, with a small stove and a narrow bed. He brought her supplies and warned her to keep smoke to a minimum and to stay out of sight if riders approached. Each morning, Nora would walk to the main cabin to prepare breakfast and dinner, returning to the line shack before dusk. At first, they maintained a careful distance, Mitchell working his ranch while Nora kept to cooking and tending the small kitchen garden she started. But as days turned into weeks, their cautious arrangement began to shift. Mitchell found himself looking forward to returning to the cabin, where Nora's cooking and quiet company awaited. He discovered she was well-read and had opinions on everything from cattle breeding to politics. She made him laugh with stories from her childhood and listened intently when he spoke of his own past. For her part, Nora bloomed under the safety of Mitchell's protection. Color returned to her cheeks, and the haunted look in her eyes faded. She took genuine pleasure in creating a home environment in Mitchell's Spartan cabin, adding small touches, wildflowers in a jar, curtains sewn from spare fabric, bread always fresh on the table. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Mitchell found himself telling Nora about his parents, how his father had died defending their first homestead, and how his mother had followed not long after. "That's why you live alone," Nora said softly. "You're afraid to lose someone again." Mitchell stiffened, unaccustomed to having his motivations laid bare. "It's simpler this way," he said defensively. "A man alone can't be disappointed. Or loved," Nora added quietly. Their eyes met, and for a breathless moment, Mitchell felt something shift between them, a recognition that frightened him with its intensity. He stood abruptly. "It's getting dark. I'll walk you to the line shack." Nora's expression showed a flash of hurt before she masked it with a smile. "Of course." As they walked in silence through the gathering dusk, Mitchell struggled with unfamiliar emotions. Nora's presence had awakened something he had deliberately buried years ago, the desire for companionship, for someone to share his life. The realization terrified him. Caring for someone meant giving them the power to destroy you when they inevitably left or died. He couldn't risk that pain again. Yet each day, the walls he had built around himself crumbled a little more. Nora's gentle strength, her resilience in the face of adversity, and her kind heart were becoming as essential to him as the air he breathed. And that dependency terrified him. Their uneasy peace was shattered one morning in early June. Mitchell had ridden out at dawn to check on a pregnant heifer, leaving Nora preparing breakfast. When he returned mid-morning, he found the cabin door swinging open, breakfast half prepared on the stove, and no sign of Nora. His heart lurched with fear as he searched the yard, calling her name. Then he saw it, a piece of paper pinned to the porch post with a knife. The message was brief and chilling. "I have what's mine. Stay out of it if you value your ranch." Yach. Cold fury swept through Mitchell. Hargrove had taken Nora, likely having watched the ranch long enough to know their routine. Mitchell saddled his fastest horse, strapped on extra ammunition, and rode hard toward Hargrove's ranch, 30 miles to the east. As he rode, all the beliefs that had governed his life for years crumbled away. He had told himself attachment was weakness, that caring for others only led to pain. Yet here he was, riding headlong into danger for a woman who had breached every wall he'd built. Mitchell reached Hargrove's impressive ranch house by late afternoon. Unlike his modest spread, Hargrove's operation was a small empire. Extensive corrals, a massive barn, bunkhouses for numerous ranch hands, and a 2-story main house painted white with green shutters. A place built to impress and intimidate. Mitchell approached openly, making no attempt at stealth. 2 ranch hands moved to intercept him, hands hovering near their weapons. "State your business," one called. "I'm here to see Hargrove," Mitchell said coldly. "Tell him Mitchell Adams is calling." The men exchanged glances before one went inside. Minutes later, Emmett Hargrove emerged onto the wide front porch, a smug smile on his face. "Adams, I was wondering how long it would take you to arrive. Dismount and join me for a drink. We have matters to discuss." "Where is she?" Mitchell demanded, remaining on horseback. Hargrove's smile didn't waver. "Miss Summers is where she belongs, preparing to become my wife. The ceremony is tomorrow." He gestured expansively. "You're welcome to attend. She'll make a beautiful bride, don't you think?" Mitchell's hand twitched near his revolver. "I want to see her." "I'm afraid that's not possible. Nora is indisposed. Wedding preparations, you understand." "You're lying," Mitchell said flatly. "She wouldn't agree to marry you willingly." Hargrove's pleasant facade slipped, revealing the coldness beneath. "Willingness is a flexible concept, Adams. Nora will do what's necessary to protect those she cares about." His eyes narrowed. "Just as you'll ride away if you want to keep that pitiful ranch of yours." Understanding dawned. "You're threatening her with my safety." "Smart man," Hargrove nodded. "Nora has agreed to become my wife, provided I leave you and your property untouched. Quite the sacrifice, wouldn't you say?" "I always knew she had a tender heart." Rage coursed through Mitchell, but he forced himself to think clearly. Charging the house would only get him killed, and Nora would still be trapped. He needed a plan. "If she's chosen to marry you, I'll respect her decision," Mitchell said, feigning defeat. "But I want to hear it from her own lips." Hargrove considered him thoughtfully. "Very well. A reasonable request. Return tomorrow for the ceremony. You can hear her vows yourself." Mitchell nodded stiffly, then wheeled his horse around. As he rode away, his mind raced. He had until tomorrow to find a way to rescue Nora from Hargrove's clutches. One thing was certain, he would not abandon her, even if it meant risking everything. Instead of returning to his ranch, Mitchell rode to the nearest town. He needed information and possibly allies. In the saloon, he found several men he knew from cattle drives, including Tom Wilkins, the local sheriff. Hargrove's got at least 15 men working for him, Wilkins confirmed after hearing Mitchell's story. And he's got the county judge in his pocket. I don't care about legal channels, Mitchell said. I need to get Nora out before the wedding tomorrow. The sheriff sighed. I can't officially help you, Adams. Hargrove would have my badge. But, he lowered his voice. His ranch hands typically celebrate at the Silver Dollar the night before a big event. Tradition. The ranch will be understaffed tonight. Mitchell nodded gratefully. It wasn't much, but it was a start. As darkness fell, Mitchell approached Hargrove's ranch from the back, having circled wide to avoid the main entrance. True to the sheriff's information, the ranch seemed quieter than earlier, with fewer men visible. Mitchell left his horse tied in a grove of trees and approached on foot. Lights blazed from the main house, and Mitchell crept closer, keeping to the shadows. Through a window, he caught a glimpse of Hargrove in his study, drinking with another man, likely discussing business. Moving around the house, Mitchell searched each window until he spotted what he sought. Nora, alone in an upstairs bedroom. His heart clenched at the sight of her. She sat on the edge of the bed, still fully dressed, her posture rigid with tension. Even from a distance, he could see she had been crying. Mitchell needed to get her attention without alerting the household. He picked up a small pebble and gently tossed it at the window. It took 3 attempts before Nora noticed. When she did, her eyes widened in shock. She glanced quickly at the bedroom door before moving to the window and opening it a crack. Mitchell, she whispered, disbelief and hope warring in her voice. You shouldn't be here. Hargrove will kill you. I'm not leaving without you, Mitchell replied firmly. Can you get out? Nora shook her head. The door is locked from the outside, and there's a guard at the end of the hall. Mitchell assessed the situation. Is there a trellis or drainage pipe near your window? Yes, but Mitchell, it's too dangerous. Hargrove said he would burn your ranch to the ground if I didn't cooperate. I don't care about the ranch, Mitchell said, the words surprising him with their truth. Not if it means losing you. Tears welled in Nora's eyes. Why would you risk everything for me? Mitchell swallowed hard, finally facing the truth he'd been fighting for weeks. Because you were right. A man alone can't be loved. And I want to be loved, Nora, by you. A sob caught in Nora's throat. I thought you wanted me gone. I was a fool, Mitchell said. Now, can you climb down a trellis in that dress? A determined smile replaced Nora's tears. Watch me. Mitchell positioned himself beneath the window as Nora carefully swung her legs over the sill. The wooden trellis creaked beneath her weight, but held as she descended slowly, her skirts hampering her movement. When she was within reach, Mitchell grasped her waist and lifted her the remaining distance, holding her against him for a moment longer than necessary. We need to move quickly, he whispered, reluctantly releasing her. My horse is in the trees beyond the corral. They stayed low, using outbuildings for cover as they made their way across the ranch yard. They had almost reached the trees when a shout went up from the house. She's gone. The woman's escaped. Lanterns flared to life as men poured from the bunkhouse and main house. Mitchell grabbed Nora's hand, and they ran for the trees. Behind them, Hargrove's voice rose above the commotion. Find them. $500 to the man who brings Adams to me alive. Mitchell helped Nora onto his horse, then swung up behind her. Hold tight, he warned before spurring the animal forward. They burst from the trees as the first riders began to mount up in pursuit. They'll follow us to your ranch, Nora said as they galloped through the darkness. We're not going to the ranch, Mitchell replied, steering his horse south instead of west. I have a friend with a place in the high country. We'll head there until I can figure something out. They rode hard through the night, changing direction several times to confuse any pursuit. By dawn, they had reached the foothills, where the terrain grew rocky and steep. Mitchell's horse was tiring, forcing them to slow their pace. We need to rest him, Mitchell said, dismounting in a sheltered canyon. And ourselves. Nora slid from the saddle, her legs buckling after the long ride. Mitchell caught her, steadying her against him. They stood that way for a long moment, the reality of their situation settling around them. You left everything behind, Nora said quietly. Your ranch, your horses, everything you've worked for. Things can be replaced, Mitchell replied. You can't. Nora looked up at him, searchingly. What happens now? Mitchell brushed a strand of hair from her face, his touch gentle. Now we keep riding. My friend Jack has a hunting cabin another day's ride from here. We'll be safe there while we decide our next move. Our next move, Nora repeated. Together? Together, Mitchell confirmed. If that's what you want. I want to be where you are, Nora said simply. I have since that first morning I cooked you breakfast. Mitchell smiled, a genuine smile that reached his eyes. When you said you'd cook for me every day? I meant it, Nora said. Every day for the rest of our lives, if you'll have me. Mitchell's answer was to lower his head and kiss her, gently at first, then with growing passion as Nora's arms wound around his neck. When they finally broke apart, both were breathless. I think I fell in love with you over flapjacks and coffee, Mitchell admitted. Nora laughed, the sound echoing in the canyon. And I fell in love with you when you rode out to save me from those men. They rested for an hour before continuing their journey, Mitchell leading the horse with Nora walking beside him. They spoke of possibilities, heading to California or Oregon, perhaps, where Hargrove had no influence. Places where they could start fresh together. By nightfall of the next day, they reached Jack's hunting cabin, a sturdy structure nestled in a hidden valley high in the mountains. Jack, an old trapper Mitchell had befriended years ago, used the cabin only in winter, leaving it empty through the warmer months. We'll be safe here for now, Mitchell said as they settled in. The cabin was basic but sound, with a stone fireplace and simple furnishings. For 2 weeks, they lived in a kind of suspended reality, isolated from the world below. They hunted, fished, and foraged together. In the evenings, they sat by the fire, talking of their pasts and planning their future. Mitchell found himself opening up in ways he never had before, sharing the pain of his losses and his fears of caring too deeply. Nora listened and understood, offering her own vulnerabilities in return. On a clear morning in late June, as they shared coffee on the cabin's small porch, a rider appeared in the valley below. Mitchell tensed, reaching for his rifle, but relaxed when he recognized Sheriff Wilkins. Stay inside, he told Nora, moving to meet the lawman. Wilkins dismounted tiredly, his expression grim. Been looking for you for days, Adams. Lucky Jack pointed me in the right direction. What's happened? Mitchell asked, dread coiling in his stomach. Wilkins removed his hat. Hargrove's dead. Mitchell stared at him in shock. Dead? How? Shot by one of his own men in a drunken argument. The fool had been promising bonuses to anyone who found you, then refused to pay when they came back empty-handed. Wilkins shook his head. His empire's falling apart already. Creditors coming out of the woodwork. Seems he was heavily in debt. Mitchell struggled to process this unexpected news. What about my ranch? Untouched, Wilkins confirmed. Though your cattle have scattered some. Nothing that can't be fixed. Mitchell felt Nora's presence beside him before she spoke. Does this mean we can go back? Wilkins nodded. Hargrove's threats died with him. His men are scattering, looking for new employment. He studied them both. Seems you two found more than trouble up here. Mitchell's arm slipped around Nora's waist, drawing her close. We found what matters. 3 days later, they rode back to Mitchell's ranch. The place looked neglected after nearly a month's absence. Fences needed mending, cattle had to be rounded up, and the garden Nora had started was overgrown with weeds. But the cabin stood waiting, and as they dismounted in the yard, Mitchell felt a sense of homecoming he hadn't experienced since his parents' deaths. It needs work, he said, watching Nora survey the property. She turned to him with a radiant smile. It's perfect. Our home. That evening, after a simple meal, Mitchell took Nora's hand and led her to the porch. The sun was setting, painting the prairie in gold and crimson. In his pocket was his mother's wedding ring, saved all these years. I used to think the frontier was no place for love, he said, turning to face her. That a man had to stand alone to survive out here. He took a deep breath. I was wrong. It's love that makes survival worthwhile. Mitchell dropped to one knee, the ring held between them. Nora Summers, I love you. Will you marry me and make this house a home? Will you cook for me every day for the rest of our lives, and let me spend those days trying to be worthy of you? Tears spilled down Nora's cheeks as she nodded. Yes, Mitchell Adams. Every day for the rest of our lives. He slipped the ring onto her finger, then rose to kiss her as the last rays of sunlight gilded the land that would be their legacy. 6 months later, On a crisp December morning, Mitchell stood in the town church watching as Nora walked toward him in a simple white dress, a bouquet of winter greenery in her hands. Sheriff Wilkins and his wife stood as witnesses, along with neighbors and friends who had helped them rebuild over the autumn months. As Nora joined him at the altar, Mitchell marveled at how completely his life had transformed. The man who had once prided himself on needing no one now found his greatest strength in the love he shared with this remarkable woman. "Ready?" Nora whispered, her blue eyes shining with love. "For everything," Mitchell replied, taking her hand in his. 5 years later, the Adams Ranch had doubled in size, with a new addition to the cabin to accommodate their growing family. 3-year-old James toddled after his father as Mitchell repaired the corral fence, while inside, Nora cradled their newborn daughter, Sarah. The frontier was still harsh, still demanding, but Mitchell had learned that facing its challenges was infinitely better with someone by your side. Every morning, he woke to the smell of coffee and breakfast cooking, to Nora's smile across the table, to the sound of his son's laughter. In the evenings, after the children were asleep, Mitchell and Nora would sit together on the porch, watching the stars appear over land that would sustain generations of their family to come. And sometimes, Mitchell would whisper against Nora's hair, "Thank you for cooking for me every day." And she would always reply, "For the rest of our lives."